Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BSA Client Conversation Series. I'm Carol Wedge, the CEO of Shepley Bulfinch, and I'm your host from the series from my home office in Concord, Massachusetts. It's a pleasure to have you join us. And this is a series we started for 2021 um, for basically client conversations, really trying to understand how our clients are doing, what they're thinking, and really showcasing some of the important work that they're doing. So we're starting the first quarter spotlighting with climate change and resiliency. And we're very excited to have John Messervy from MGH Brigham joining us in the program today. So the format's going to vary. Actually, next month we're going to have a case study of the BU project. But what we're going to do is start with some breakout rooms and some socialization, knowing we're all missing some of the serendipity of seeing each other. If we were gathering in person, we'd be having coffee and chatting and catching up. But first, I want to thank John Messervy for joining us. It's a pleasure to see him. I've known John for a long time, and we'll be talking with him today. But before we get into what we'll be talking about, I just want to do a bit of an intro. So John's an architect. So he's one of those people on the owner side that's an architect and can relate to many of the BSA members. But again, our membership is more diverse than it's ever been. John serves as the corporate director of design and construction for Mass General Brigham, which many of us know, formerly known as Partners, who did a branding change a year or two ago. And John could tell us about that. But importantly, it's a 14 hospital network in New England with other ambulatory locations and one of the largest private employer in the Commonwealth. So MGH Brigham has a wide reach and influence. John's responsible for the multi-year facility planning program and their large-scale construction projects. His team manages 160 million annually in utility purchase, which is kind of mind-boggling, and the system's sustainability initiative and resiliency planning. So some other important aspects is Mass General Brigham was a founding member of the Healthier Hospital Initiative, and John chaired the Healthy Hospital Steering Committee. MGB is also a founding member of the Green Health Exchange, and John sits on the board as treasurer and participates with many other organizations also around the city and New England and the country, including the Green Ribbon Commission. I just want to say a little bit about his early career. He was director of design and construction for DCPO, which is now DCAM, which many of us know, headed the urban design team for Boston's Neighborhood Development Agency, and worked in several firms in the Boston area, including Still & Lee, Carr & Lynch Associates, and Urban Design Associates. So John, welcome. We're so glad to have you make time for us this morning, and we're looking forward to having you share some thoughts and your valuable perspective.
Thanks so much, Carol, and good morning, everybody. It's delightful to be here. I know many of your faces and wish we could do it in person and be more interactive, but anyway, it is what it is, right? So part of what I want to do today is tell a bit of a story about what centers our work or my work at the corporate level, and determine to what extent that may resonate for the work that you're doing. The early direction and support we got was from our CEO, Gary Gottlieb, and 10 years ago, he recognized the commitment that we needed to be making to sustainability as an organization. Healthcare itself has a very large environmental footprint, and basically, we don't want to be contributing to the health issues of the patients we're treating. So it's started off as simple as that, and it's got a lot more complicated since then. Next, Patricia. So one of the lenses that we use to think about our work is our role as a healthcare provider in the overall health and well-being of the individual. And this is a chart that has been circulating for the past 10 years or so, and I'd say for the past 5 years, it's really got the attention of a lot of healthcare providers around the country. And basically, what it's saying, if you look up in the top left-hand corner, that access to good healthcare really only accounts for about 20% of the health and well-being of the individual. That there are many other factors to contribute to how well you live on a daily basis. And some of these are probably pretty obvious, socioeconomic factors, and that goes back to, did you even go to preschool? And certainly, did you go to high school, or did you even get to college? What your earning potential is? Do you have a steady job? To your physical environment, and that's everything from, do you have access to green space? Can you walk to shop? Do you have healthy food places nearby? And then over to healthy behaviors, which have to do with, smoking, drinking, using drugs. Do you exercise? All of those factors contribute to the health of the individual. And we as a healthcare organization are refocusing on ways in which we can start to address some of these underlying factors in the health of the populations we serve. And that is taking us in the direction of something we call, or it's a program with a name called Anchor Institutions. And the focus of that is to align with other organizations that are perhaps active and successful in providing affordable housing, that are perhaps active and successful in providing healthy food, that are active and successful in providing additional educational opportunities beyond the traditional education opportunities. So we are looking at ways to partner with these other kinds of organizations. And in the Boston area, we're not the only organization. In fact, Kate Walsh, CEO of Boston Medical Center, is very active in this work. And BMC, I say, is one of the leaders in the country in terms of the work of the Anchor Institution members. Next, Patricia. So that lens takes us on the facility side, real estate side, to focus on our healthcare emissions and our carbon emissions. And while this is an interesting chart, in fact, it doesn't represent the United States, doesn't even represent Massachusetts or MGB. What it is for world healthcare. However, that data was collected by Arup, who did this work. But the point is that the use of fossil fuels makes up a huge component of our healthcare footprint. And that's everything from heating and cooling our buildings, cooking food, to our supply chain. And next, Patricia. One of the ways in which we are beginning to address that, and have been addressing it, is through the Healthier Hospitals initiative, in which Carol mentioned we were a founding member 10 years ago. And there are 6 challenge areas that you can sign on to as a member of the Healthier Hospitals initiative. We have over 1,500 hospital members now in the United States. That represents almost a third of the hospitals in the United States have taken on one or more of these challenges. We as a founding member took on all 6 of those challenges, and we've made progress on all 6 of these challenge areas, and we report on them annually to the HHI, or at this point it's Practice Green Health steering committee. But the leaner energy challenge is one that I think we've made good progress on. Patricia? And this basically represents what we have been able to achieve in reducing our greenhouse gases over the past 10 years. It's a 58% reduction. And this is perhaps a little bit of a confusing chart, but the top red dashed line represents the annual growth of our energy consumption. And that's a combination of both new space coming online, but also increasing amount of electronics in the patient environment, portable electronics. So we've seen a dramatic increase in what we might call plug load. In an inpatient hospital environment, plug load could account for between 20 and 25% of the energy use in a building. On the dashed blue line across left to right, that's the state's Global Warming Solutions Act as it presently stands, that would get us to 80% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2050. And as those of you who follow the legislation know that there is a bill pending right now that is bouncing backwards and forwards between the legislature and Governor Baker to rapidly increase the rate by which we get to net zero as a state. And then the smaller dashed line is our goal, internal goal, which originally was to get to 25% by 2015. But at this point, we believe we're in a position to get to 100% emission free by 2025. And that's a challenge. We don't know how we're going to get there, but we're on a trajectory. And I'd say the hard work is ahead, but nevertheless, we're heading in the right direction. Next, Patricia. So we are heavily invested in renewable energy. This is a project that Graham Gund Architects did 25 years ago for us down on Cape Cod, Spalding Cape Cod. And we have both carports and a ground-mounted PV array over our leaching field down on the Cape. And it provides about 75% of our electricity need for that facility. Overall, you know, we have contracted for almost 32 megawatts of renewable energy. And that is a lot of energy, but it's only about 20% of the amount of energy we use on an annual basis. You know, we are a huge energy user. We, as you might imagine, inpatient and research buildings use a lot of energy. We operate 24/7. And so, you know, we've got a long way to go, both in terms of sourcing carbon-free energy, but also reducing through energy conservation our use of energy. I should have said on that previous slide that part of our move or part of our ability to get to 58% was that we've reduced our internal energy consumption by 19% over those 5 years. Next, Patricia. So we are, you know, we are working on new high performance buildings. The assembly row back office building, if you will, that you see off 93 North is operating at 55 BTUs per square foot per year. And that we're told by our engineering folks that puts us in the top 1% for office buildings in the country. We're working on a template outpatient facility. One of these has just started construction up in Salem, New Hampshire. We hope to build 3 more of them. And we are aspiring to net zero. It's going to be hard to get there, partly because we have MRIs and CTs on the ground floor, and we have operating rooms up on the top floor. So they are large energy users, but we also are looking at geothermal, and we're looking at on-site PV. So we're going to get close. Whether we make it on day one, we'll have to see. But this is the kind of commitment we are making as an organization. We're being supported in making these kinds of commitments. Next. Second piece of our work has to do with our resiliency in the face of climate change. And you know, we take pride in working with Perkins and Will on the design of the first purpose-built resilient hospital in Spalding, which opened in 2013, actually just 2 weeks after 2 weeks before the marathon bombing, where many of those unfortunate patients were taken for rehabilitation. But we learned a lot in doing that building. You know, it's not the site we would have chosen if we were trying to minimize our impact of sea level rise, but for a number of reasons, that's where we ended up. And so we were challenged, and we spent a lot of time and worked with a lot of very smart people in, basically it was lessons learned from Katrina down in New Orleans and riverine flooding, which affects Louisville and quite a few other cities in the center of the United States, and where they are able and need to protect their their hospitals from almost annual flooding of the rivers now. So a lot was learned here, and we're applying that to our new buildings. Next. So Sandy was the wake-up call for us internally, and this is a real-time screen grab of what was happening in the New York, New Jersey area during Sandy, and the number of healthcare facilities that were knocked out of service. And as I indicate over on the side, 174, not all inpatient hospitals, but hospitals and health clinics were knocked out of service. Only 7 hospitals were able to keep operating through Sandy, and every one of those had on-site generating capability beyond the emergency generators. And that's, I think that's a very important part of our story, and is an important strategy moving forward in building resilient healthcare. Next. So the study we undertook, and Arup was also our consultant on this resiliency study, Lisa Dixon in particular. And, you know, we went through a 3-step process. One was looking at the predictions for sea level rise, for precipitation, for wind, for temperature. And then we prioritized those impacts on each of 30 different key sites. And those key sites included all of our hospitals, some of our major health centers, research labs, and our 2 data centers, and our large administrative facility out in Somerville. And based on the specific risks of each of those locations, we came up with a set of adaptation strategies to try and protect those facilities. Next. So, you know, this is the kind of overlay of mapping for the Mass General site, which happens to be unfortunately quite vulnerable to flooding, both from the harbor side and also down the Charles River from heavy precipitation inland. And we used real events, real storms to model on the top of sea level rise. And we looked at 2 different time periods. One time period was 2030 or so, and perhaps 10 years either side of 2030. And then the second time period was 2070, and 10 or so years on either side of 2070. And partly that's because other organizations, especially public agencies, were looking at those 2 windows as ways to inform their strategies for how to deal with sea level rise, in particular in the city of Boston and Cambridge. But also, you know, the 2070 window frame sort of represents sort of the 50-year life of a typical building. So if we are building a new building or designing a new building today, we need to look out at what some of the predictions are of the weather, the extreme weather events, and the potential for flooding in particular that those buildings are likely to encounter 50 years from today. So listing on the right of the, I realize it's hard to read, but those are basically the 30 sites and their vulnerability in 2030 and 2070 to storm surge precipitation, which means local flooding, heat, which we're all going to be exposed to, wind, which we'll all be exposed to, and we've included seismic because some of the engineering actually related to wind is also applicable to seismic events. Next. And it took us to some very specific sets of analyses and recommendations. This again is the Mass General site, and the takeaway here is that we decided that the best approach is to try and harden each building individually, not create a district that's cordoned off from the river or the north end, because I think that would be impossible. But really look to each individual building, and I think this is something that in your work as architects and engineers you need to be thinking about. Obviously, we can't do this alone. It needs to be a regional approach to addressing the threats of climate change, especially flooding. but there are things we need to be looking at in the design of our individual buildings. And you can see that the cost estimates are pretty significant, you know, as high as $23 million to protect MGH. These are just the existing buildings from the potential of sea level rise and flooding. Next. The study ended up in a set of recommendations, both resiliency guidelines, and this would be a how-to approach to the design of a building based on the location within the MGB system, the geography that you're identifying, and what the impacts have been determined to be. Next. But you know, no matter what we do with our own individual buildings, we're really still at the mercy of what's going on around us. And since we do operate 24/7, we have to operate 24/7. That's the goal, is to provide continuity of service. Then the condition of our transportation systems, of our imported energy, and certainly telecommunications are all critical. And it's frankly, I have not heard a lot about how each of those different sectors of our economy are dealing with the threats of climate change in this area. I know there's work going on, but there's not a lot of public information available yet about how exactly these organizations or these sectors are proposing to prepare themselves for climate change and flooding in particular. So, you know, we are looking at essentially being independent, operating independently. Next. And the first building that is likely to have that capability is a new Cambridge Street building, which NBBJ is designing for Cambridge Street for the main campus at Mass General. It's a large building, 1 million square feet, and it will have the capability to operate independent of everything around it. It will be connected by bridges to the rest of the campus, so we can basically what it becomes is a location that we move patients to if they haven't been discharged, and try and empty out all of our other existing inpatient buildings, which is going to be hard to do. We have 1,000 beds down there. This building will be about 250 beds. But that's the approach we're taking. I think the big challenge that we have in promoting investment on resilience strategies is that you don't know when an extreme weather event is coming. You don't know what the magnitude of that extreme weather event is going to be, and you don't know the frequency of that extreme weather event. So it really, you know, if you're talking to a CFO or even the board of your own hospital or a developer or anybody else that you may be working with, trying to make the case that you need to make a massive investment. And in our case, across all of our sites, that investment could approach $150 million to protect the continuity of service of our operations. So it's a challenge, and nobody, you know, I have not seen any articles that have explained how to do this. So you really are hoping that the leadership of that company, again, whether it's a developer or a hospital, recognizes the importance of protecting your facility. The interesting thing is that, in fact, the cost of repairing your facility is often not as high as the loss of business that you lose during the period you're out of service. And that was one of the major takeaways from New York, is that it took so long to repair, to get replacement equipment, especially electrical equipment for ordinary buildings, that they were out of business for a long time. So the loss of business is probably much more significant than in fact the economic cost of repairs. And that would argue in favor of protecting your buildings as best you can, so that you don't have that economic loss from continuing operations. Next. So anchor institutions is something I mentioned early on. This is the social determinants of health. One of the areas in which we believe we can make some progress is on diversifying the construction workforce. And we did an analysis, and it suggested that if indeed we were able to meet the City of Boston resident jobs policy, that is a regulation and a requirement in the City of Boston, that we could increase the take-home pay of from $10 to $20 million for persons of color and women. Next. So this is part of the analysis that we did, and the underlying analysis with the gray and the blue, if you will, is based on the workforce distribution for the London building, which was a building that was completed at Mass General 10 years ago. And so what it means is that for the electricians over on the left-hand side, 1% of the electricians were women, and 17% were persons of color, and the rest of the bar, the gray, the light gray, were white males. So you can see that by trade, the mixes varies. The orange arrow is interesting because the orange arrow is what the average mix of women and persons of color are in 2018 based on an analysis we did of the city's data. So there has been an improvement in many of the trades in bringing women and persons of color into the trades, but there's still a significant gap. Basically the gap is from the orange arrow up to the line. That should be 52%, by the way, not 51%. That gap represents a $10 to $20 million earnings potential on the Cambridge Street building that we're talking about at Mass General. So we as an organization have organized a board level subcommittee at Mass General that is focused on making sure we attain those targets for the Mass General project. And be glad to share more about how we do that. We're just in the early stages. Obviously, it involves working with the building trades because these are all union jobs. And if you look at the first four building trades by the numbers, the electricians, there were 825,000 hours worked on that project. The electricians accounted for 27% of those hours. The carpenters for 14%, pipe fitters 12%. Labor is 10%. If you take those four trades, they accounted for 2/3 of the labor on building the London building. And you could expect, since it's a similar building, that the Cambridge Street building would reflect a similar distribution of labor by specialty. It's a much larger project. It's probably going to be close to 2 million work hours. So our focus is to work primarily, but not exclusively, with the electricians, carpenters, pipe fitters, and laborers to encourage both increasing recruitment into apprenticeship programs. And we want to come alongside the trades. This is not about, putting a mandate on the trades and saying, make it happen. This is about how do we work with you to be successful in increasing the distribution and the workforce that you are bringing in. There's a lot of older people, a lot of older white people who are falling out of the top of this scale, who are retiring. Typical tradesperson retires in their late 50s. There are lots of opportunities for young folks to come in. What can we do to help with that recruitment process? What can we do to help through the preparation of those young people, so that when they do get into the apprenticeship programs, they're successful? There's a program called, some of you may have heard about, called Building Pathways, that's run by Mary Vogel. It's partly supported by the trades, and it's a prep course for young people to help them get ready for everything from helping them understand why it's important to show up at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. on the job. It's helping them with English as a second language. It's helping them with writing skills. It's helping them with a lot of different things. And we're finding that those are the kinds of ways, those are the kinds of services that we can help as an organization support so that there is a successful increase in the diversity of the workforce. It's really important to us, and it should be important to everybody else who's building in the city. I think that may be the last slide, Patricia. Oh, one more. Can't forget at the end of the day, I enjoy working on beautiful buildings, and some of them are reflected here. There's some other remarkable buildings that have been designed. There's the Russell Museum that Lears Weinzappel designed at the entrance of Mass General, which is a really wonderful building, being used right now actually as a vaccination site for MGH patients. But we have the Spalding Hospital up at the top. The bed and the bamboo garden outside is an ICU in the Lunda building. And then we have the Hale building, which is a recently opened transformative science building at the Brigham. And we are committed to LEED Gold as our baseline standard for new buildings. We've built 3 million square feet. The Shapiro building at the Brigham is the only LEED silver building we have. The rest are all LEED Gold, and our upcoming buildings will be at a minimum all LEED Gold as well. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you, John. That's fabulous. That's really wonderful. Both inspiring and pragmatic all at the same time, and I think quite realistic. I wanted to start with a question about, you sort of started your whole presentation with leadership and partnerships and sort of anchor institutions. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about your partnerships or how you build those partnerships across institutions? Because I feel like, your organization has been a real role model, excuse me, in thinking about the environment and climate change. And again, some of your most valuable assets are in vulnerable areas. But it also seems like there are some institutions that are maybe a little more focused on their day-to-day, again, not to criticize them, sort of financial welfare and well-being, but having a harder time building support within their organization. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you see or what you're hopeful about in terms of those partnerships going forward.
Well, I mean, that's a big question, Carol, but a couple of snippets. You're right. I mean, just like any other business, there are folks who are early adopters, and there are folks who don't want to be at the front of the parade, but benefit from knowing what's been successful that others are doing. And I think that's what's going on in healthcare, just like other sectors of the economy. We are fortunate. Mass General Brigham are fortunate to have friends across the country who are working in some of these leading hospitals, and there's an open sharing of work that's going on. That's both in the planning and design of hospitals, but it's also in strategies used to get to net zero. And obviously, geography plays a big role in how quickly and how easily it is to move to net zero. We're in New England, which is a heat-dominated geography. That's very different than Southern California. So there's a lot of sharing, and part of it is building those relationships outside your own organization. Obviously, the other critical piece, just like any business, is building relationships inside your organization. And those are both vertical and horizontal relationships. We're very fortunate, as the opening slide indicated, to have leadership who recognizes not only the importance, but the sort of ethical commitment that we as a healthcare provider have to reducing our environmental footprint, and to also taking almost a paternalistic view of populations that we serve. We need to do more than just provide good healthcare. I think we're realizing that we really need to try and tackle some of these systemic underlying issues that as a country we're facing, and we have a role to play there. And then horizontally, there's some fantastic people in our organization. some of you may have met Doug Carney, for instance, who just joined the Brigham, very capable, very highly experienced individual who came from Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. It's people like Doug who are going to be leading our organization forward. And, they bring their experiences and their knowledge and their commitment to collaboration to our organization. And so that's another way that it works. Just speaking.
The thing I'm struck by is what an important role your organization and those organizations and people play in inspiring others. The quote that you mentioned of hardening the buildings will cost 150 million, but the loss of business and getting back up on our feet after a tragic event is much, much, much more significant. And so makes me also want to kind of move in the question of, I'll call it the COVID question, but try and frame it as a positive of, since our world have been turned upside down in many ways, do you see new opportunities, certainly around the social justice and healthy communities aspects, but do you see other things being able to be discussed as we've lived through a pandemic that maybe weren't on the table before? Are there things that you're hopeful about around things we can think about changing in a different way?
Well, yes. Short answer is yes, absolutely. And I think we have found that we can be pretty nimble, which is not what we typically are. We tend to lumber, but we can be pretty nimble in responding to situations. And a data point that I heard just a couple of months ago was that Mass General has distributed over 700 tons of food to community folks through the health centers and freestanding locations in the neighborhoods. That's not a business we are in or we're in, but a need was seen, and a group of people in our community health team, and this is the same at the Brigham and Spalding and our other hospitals, but I have that data point from Mass General. So we are able to respond where there's a need to respond. And, the other thing we're doing, for instance, and I've been part of a couple of times now, we're making, I don't know why this name, I think it's an unfortunate name, but we're calling them equity kits. And it's a plastic bag, and it has 10 face masks, hand sanitizer, soap, and it has an instruction sheet in there, both how to take care of yourself and your family to protect from COVID, but also what resources there are in the particular community in which you live. Volunteers have put together over 400,000 of these equity kits and distributed them, and that's up to Lawrence, East Boston. These are communities that we do not serve directly, but where there's a significant need. And then obviously there's the whole sort of engineering facility side of COVID. How do we respond? What are the lessons learned? And there are some lessons learned about how we specifically respond to COVID. And fortunately, the infrastructure in most of our buildings was adequate to respond on an inpatient side. We haven't had to make a lot of significant changes. But I think going forward, as we begin to take a perspective on, okay, so what are the range of pandemics that may be coming forward, and how do we prepare for those? Then I think we're going to be looking at issues around air quality, around air changes, and it sort of starts taking us in backwards from the push on energy efficient buildings. I mean, we still have to be energy efficient, but if you are exhausting a lot more outside air, unable to recirculate as much air, then it means you're heating and cooling more air, and that's a challenge from the energy consumption side.
Yeah, and I've definitely heard from engineers across BAC membership and our projects is, let's not quickly jump to that being the only solution. Yes, that's like the first knee-jerk solution, but let's really look at the whole impact and sort of the complexity there. I wanted to go to a couple questions we have in the chat. One was, what are the key strategies to make the Cambridge Street building stand alone? Can you just talk a little bit about that? The question's kind of probing what are the limitations or challenges and just sort of a few nuggets. We have BSA members who are down in the weeds of actually designing these things. So I think they want to learn a little bit about the things you think are important about what you're doing on Cambridge Street.
Well, I don't know why Jacob Knowles is right up on top of my screen there.
He's on mine too. Hi, Jacob.
Good morning.
You want him to take that question?
Jacob, actually, go ahead, Jacob, because he's right in the middle of developing those strategies. But I will just let me say that it is going to have on-site generation, obviously, and the way in which it's basically a bathtub, and we sacrifice an underground garage to flooding. Because we can't protect flooding from getting in there, but because of the bridge connections, both to the existing campus and potentially across this Blossom Street to Charles River Park, which is at a higher elevation. There are ways to connect to dry land. But nevertheless, Jacob, if you want to jump in, you've got the nuts and bolts of it all.
Yeah, give us a couple nuggets, Jacob.
Well, I mean, the overall goal is that the building can operate for 5 days, cut off from power and from the steam that's coming from the vicinity plant in Cambridge. So we have backup heat, we have backup power generation, and we're able to, withstand some pretty extreme conditions for that time frame. And that's based on reasonably high load conditions. So if it was a shoulder season or the loads were lower, then you could potentially go longer. And we're drawing a lot from our experience working on the VA replacement hospital in New Orleans. Spalding Rehab is a great local example, but if you want to, take on a challenge like 12 feet of flooding above ground level, the entire first floor can flood, and it basically looks like an aircraft carrier floating in the ocean. Can operate for 7 days. And so we're drawing from that experience, on a federally funded project to inform our design for the Cambridge Street facility.
Well, and I think a lot of us are hopeful that this administration and the folks that are beginning to look like they frame the climate team are also going to be strong partners in how we think about this and how we learn, again, across regions and across institutions. A question I wanted to get to before we go to the audience, John, is could you just talk a little bit about your path? Like how, as an architect who, went to MIT and worked for a few firms, can you tell us a little bit about your path and what inspired you to be such a leader within sustainability and resiliency?
I'm fortunate to have worked with 3 or 4 people who have been tremendous mentors to me through my career, and I hope everybody has had that experience because it was really profound for me at different points in my career, and each one of those persons brought a different perspective on, and they were all architects, but brought a very different perspective on ways in which they view the world and sort of their contribution to the improvement of society, if you will. And I'd say but specifically the resiliency and sustainability work, it's sort of being in the right place at the right time or the right place at the wrong time, depending on your perspective. We were, and it goes back to the design of the Yawkey Center for Outpatient Care at Mass General 20 years ago. Where we were aware of the potential for flooding from the Charles River, but we were also very well aware of the need to be promoting a green building in terms of what a green building meant 20 years ago. So that project with Michael Fieldman and Cambridge 7 and who did the exterior design, and Perkins and Will and Steffi and Bradley, who did the fit out. 4 architects on a project. That was a lot of fun. But and BR Plessé was the engineer for that too, by the way. It was an interesting challenge because we designed a building that we thought was state of the art at the time, and we found when it opened in 2005 that in fact things had moved along quite a bit, and we were able to go back in 3 years later and reduce the energy consumption by about 50% pretty quickly. So that roof gardens, furnishings, trying to minimize toxic chemicals in the furnishings, it just sort of evolved. And working inside a large organization and planning buildings, you get to meet the employees at all level of the organization. And a lot of those folks had strong feelings, especially some of the clinical folks, about the need to be promoting healthy buildings. And so that's kind of where this took off from. And the resiliency work was an extension of that. Obviously, we are I'd say 2/3 of the buildings that we own and occupy are in areas that are vulnerable to flooding, based
Yeah.
on the studies that have been done around the
Well,
Boston metropolitan area.
one question was about how the other facilities you have in Charlestown. I think of that as the what keeps John up at night question.
Right.
Watching the weather forecast and thinking about your properties in the lying areas. Are there things about Charlestown and the rest of the Navy Yard that you're looking at right now?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And the Spalding was designed so that we could sacrifice the ground floor, basically. Even though there's some critical operations there that we have to protect, the ground floor is sacrificed. But all of the utilities, including electrical substation, are up in the penthouse. So we do, and we have cogeneration there as well. So we do have the ability to as Jacob was mentioning about the MGH building, we do have the ability to operate for at least 5 days at Charlestown. And by then, since this is a tidal flood, we expect the tides would have receded, the storm would have moved away, and while there may be puddles, the building would be accessible again. And so that's really the approach we took there.
That's great. There's some more questions, people really inspired by your thoughts about social equity and healthy communities and all of the different ways we think about how healthcare institutions can influence this. There are some other questions about, how do we connect the dots on more organizations thinking about their construction workforce, or just understanding their role as leaders in addressing some of these socioeconomic and social justice impacts. Do you want to just say a little bit more about that, or are those constituencies building across organizations so that people are helping each other learn and explore ideas in the same way we've shared resiliency and COVID learning?
That's a wonderful idea, and this is not something we can tackle alone, and we're not tackling it alone. There are some recent project labor agreements between developers and the building trades, where commitments to a diversified workforce is an important component of that PLA. And so we're not alone, but at the same time, I think there are other major institutions in the city who are undertaking significant building projects, and I think there's a tremendous opportunity to collaborate here. And again, it's it's about raising everybody's vote. One of the statistics, and I don't know if folks remember, there was a BU study from 2015, and the Globe captured it about life expectancy. The life expectancy in Roxbury was 59 years old. Average life expectancy in Back Bay was 92. That's a 33-year difference in life expectancy for two neighborhoods that are separated by less than 3 miles. I mean, that
you can walk between them. Yeah,
you can walk between them. So there's a lot inside those numbers, obviously, but the point is, there are things we can do in our daily work to help address some of these inequities, and certainly in our construction work, and also in our design work, because we're looking to the engineering and architects too to diversify their organizations in the same way, and again, glad to help in whatever ways we can to make that happen. But certainly on the construction workforce, I think we can collaborate. Glad to share, glad to get a meeting together of other nonprofits in particular in the area who may want to think about what can be done in a a more uniform and organized way than us doing it alone.
Well, and it also strikes me that there's opportunities for BSA members to think about engagement, whether people are working with ACE or whatever those pipelines are.
Right.
The thing I kind of often want to do is at the bottom of your chart, list the annual salary that those trades earn, because I think there's sort of an awakening to the viability of those jobs. You can't outsource your electrician. You can't outsource your plumber. So there's a couple more questions. One is about the city's ideas about getting to carbon neutrality. And just can you talk a little bit about if you're engaging with the city or how you participate with the city? I've definitely seen you share your story at the Green Ribbon Commission, but can you give us any perspective on maybe how other sectors should be thinking about their role in climate change and resiliency going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we absolutely agree with the city's goal. We need to get to net zero, and that's a commitment of our organization too. I think the pathway there is where we may have differences, and rather than it being sort of prescriptive, which is sort of the way that the roadmap is presently cast, that we'd be looking at more performance based, and that I think this is a discussion that we and other organizations are having. I don't want to get into it in depth, but because at the end of the day, I mean, we're all trying to get to the same place. It's just how do we get from here to there, and in the breakout group before this larger session, I was talking about we are very conservative organizations, and especially when it comes to the health and safety of our patients and our staff. And so we need access to multiple fuel sources for just the reason that we were talking about. If we lose power from the grid, we need the ability to be able to generate power on site. And right now, we don't have much alternative. We don't really have any alternative but to use natural gas to do that. I'm hoping that hydrogen will emerge over time as a viable source. Right now, it's not economically viable. It takes more electricity to generate hydrogen than you get as an output. If it's tied to renewable energy production, then there's a way to do that. But anyway, there's some things to be sorted out there. But today, and for the buildings that we're designing, for the one that Jacob's working on, we are very dependent on natural gas, or in the case of the Mass General one, on district steam from the power plant across the river in Cambridge to heat that building. And that's kind of a unique situation. I mean, Matt, Brigham's hooked up to basically a district energy plant as well in Maytap. And, it makes a lot of sense. We've got some quirky economics in some of these deals, but as an approach to powering a community, I think district power makes a lot of sense. So again, bottom line, we're in absolute agreement. We are very supportive of what the city's trying to do, what the state's trying to do. Healthcare is kind of a unique animal, and we're looking for a bit of room to operate on our way to get from here to there.
Yeah, and more of a dialogue on not all buildings are the same, and
exactly.
Getting to performance standards, understanding that there's an interim space.
Yeah.
I guess the thing is we're going to end our time. I just wanted to give you a chance to maybe give some advice to the BSA members. How can you help BSA members? You've been on the board. You and I overlapped on the board at the BSA. You're, an architect from your sort of original career path. Is there any advice you give to BSA members as they think about the future ahead and just things they should be paying attention to, learning, engaging in? Just a little chance of advice from John Messervy, maybe.
Well, obviously it's from my very unique perspective. We each have our unique perspectives, but I think our work fits in a social context, and for me, that social context is very real and very important. And so, even though my purpose is to design buildings that work for our hospitals. You know, those buildings do fit in communities. Those buildings have an opportunity to benefit the community, either by making space available for them, and that's indoor as well as outdoor space. You know, one of the things we've talked about is if we're buying land and putting community health centers on it, why don't we make the air rights of those buildings available for affordable housing developer to put affordable housing on top of our buildings rather than it just being a single-use building. So I think there's lots of opportunities to think creatively, and we as a nonprofit institution like to think creatively. There's only so much we can do, though, and we're certainly not going to be a housing developer, but there are certainly some very successful nonprofit housing developers in the area that we can collaborate with. I think also you need to be in total control of your skill set. First and foremost, you need to know how to be a good architect and what it takes to be a good architect. You have to stay on top of the evolving technology that goes into buildings, as well as the building materials. And I'm all about eliminating unhealthy, toxic materials from everything we do in our buildings. This, again, we've got PVC pipe all through our buildings, and there's not much alternative today, but there will be in the future. So I think that's the other area. Indoor air quality, promoting through the work that you do, the message back to manufacturers of building components, furniture, that we want non-toxic products to live with.
That's great. Well, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your experience and perspective. And we all learn from you at every level. And we're excited about.
I learned from all of you too, by the way. I really love working with my architects, our architects.
Yeah. All of our AEC providers. I do think there's some exciting partnerships as we think about the future, how organizations that are mission driven can help other organizations understand the future. So just want to thank you, John, for all the work you've done, and always being willing to entertain the next question of maybe we're not there yet and can't quite commit to it, but whether it's exploring healthy materials or embodied carbon or the future, you've just been an inspiration to so many. So we want to thank you for joining us today. There's lots of thank yous in the chat from lots of folks you already know, a lot of friends that maybe haven't seen as often this year. And to the BSA members, I hope you'll join us next month. In March, we're going to have a case study, a virtual tour of the BU Center for Computing and Data Science, which is targeting net zero. And interestingly, Jacob, who shared a little bit with us today, will also be joining us as the Director of Sustainability from BR+A Consulting Engineers. So have a great day, everyone. And thanks again, John. Always a pleasure to be with you and be inspired by all the great things that you've accomplished. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, John.
As well, Carol.